Welcome. It's nice to have lighting tonight. I'm Elizabeth Spencer. I'm the Director of Library Services here at the State Library, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all tonight to our second Disrupted Festival of Ideas program for the year, The Right to Die. Before we start, just a little bit of housekeeping. If you're looking for the toilets, they're right out that door there on the right-hand side near the glass doors. We'll also ask you to turn your mobile phones to silent or turn them off tonight so we can have a really good discussion. If you'd like to share your thoughts on social media, you can do so on Twitter on #Disrupted21. If there is an emergency and there is a fire evacuation, please look for a State Library staff member. I can't see anything, but the State Library staff members, please stand up. See, they are. Beautiful smiling faces. They'll know where to lead you to if anything happens. I'd like to start by acknowledging tonight that we're meeting on Noongar Whadjuk Budja and pay my respects to elders past and present and the strength of their continuing culture. So those of you who've come to previous Disrupted Festival of Ideas events might know that we're now in its 8th year and that we started this free festival as a way of provoking discussion and debate and creative ideas. And, you know, libraries have always traditionally been homes of knowledge, been homes of providing access to a diverse range of ideas, and this is just a different way of delivering it. So we're really excited to continue to do that. We also know that as libraries, we have a real charter that we work within around freedom of speech and balanced perspectives and ensuring that all voices are heard, whether we agree with those voices or not. So that is really the philosophy behind the Festival of Ideas, and we believe it's really important that that continues in a library and it continues to be offered to the community for free. So thank you for your support. So I'm just trying to find my pages here. So look, we also live stream this event so it can reach across Western Australia, but we also encourage you in the live audience to ask questions. So I know there'll be an opportunity at the end to have some audience Q&A, and we've got microphones that'll be coming around. So when you get to that part, I'd please ask you just to be patient and to wait for the microphone to come to you, because we are recording tonight, so we want your questions to be heard and shared by people who are online as well. So as we know, the only constant is change, and that, as Heraclitus said, you can't step into the same river twice. So we've taken on that philosophy at the State Library, and we've adapted the delivery of our Disrupted Festival of Ideas to a monthly format. So this is the second in our series, and I'd really like to acknowledge the role that the Centre for Stories has played in partnering with us to deliver this session. But without going on for too much longer, because I know you'd much rather listen to the panel, I'd like to introduce the second in our 2021 series, delivered in partnership with the Centre for Stories. And I'd like to introduce our facilitator, Rita Alfred-Sager, who probably won't be able to introduce herself, so I'd like to read to you Rita's experience and her amazing ability to be the facilitator tonight. So Rita is a journalist and media consultant with broad experience across a range of, turning the page, professional, sorry, wrong page. Just bear with me for a second here. Professional disciplines. She spent 20 years as a newscaster presenting national and international news stories for the BBC in London. Most recently, she's used her extensive news skills to work as a media consultant for a range of different organisations, including the international aid sector and the hospice and palliative care movement. Rita moved to Perth from the UK just a few short months before the assisted dying debate got underway in WA. She's recorded stories from both sides of the care debate, speaking to passionate activists and those advocating against the right to this ultimate choice. So I'd like to hand over to Rita. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Liz, for that introduction and wholesome introduction to my career. sounded great. Thank you very much. And welcome, everybody. It's so great to see so many of you here this evening. And I know that this is being live streamed, this event, so I'd like to welcome our online audience as well. I've heard from some members of the panel that actually this is going to be a global audience. A lot of people are joining us from overseas, which is probably the only way they're going to get to Australia. Now, before I introduce our panel this evening, I would also like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land on which we are meeting, the Whadjuk Noongar people, and pay respects to elders past, present, and emerging. So I'm your facilitator this evening, and I'm here from the Centre for Stories. We are an arts and cultural organisation based just a few blocks away in Northbridge. If you haven't heard of us before, hop onto our website at thecenterforstories.com. At the Centre, we believe that everyone has a story and that stories are important. Our aim is to support people to be able to learn the craft of storytelling, something that's really waned in our evolving society. And we like to collect these stories, share them, archive them online, as well as at live events like this. We think that stories bring communities together. They generate conversation about issues that matter. The conversation we're going to engage in this evening is a very important one. In a few weeks, as you know, WA will become only the second state in Australia to legalise voluntary assisted death. It's being billed as an historic event and makes us perhaps a leader in challenging and perhaps shifting our attitudes to death and dying in the 21st century. I'm going to ask the panel what they think about that, but I'd also like to ask you, the audience, to join in that conversation, because this is what this event should be about. It's about sharing ideas and conversations. So to answer some of the questions and perhaps share their own stories, please welcome our panel tonight. And I'm going to go right to left. No, I'm not. I'm going to go... So to my left, I've got Kathy Henkel. She's a director and film producer. Along with Sam Lara, she co-produced a film called Laura's Choice, which was aired, I think, about 6 weeks ago on ABC. And it's been aired. I think it's true to say that it has absolutely generated a tsunami of interest from all over the world, I think, Kathy. And Kathy will talk to us a little bit about that. And also her journey, her VAD journey with her mother, whom the film is about. So on my right, makes no sense at all, but on my right is Professor Samar Owen, and she is a researcher in palliative care. And as well as that, she's the president of the Motor Neurone Disease Association in WA. Samar's research over many, many years has really focused on palliative care and communities and how we support people within communities who are dying from either terminal disease or the natural process of aging. Belinda Tay, in the far right, is an advocate and campaigner for voluntary assisted death, who galvanised, I think, the campaign here in WA with her walk from Melbourne to the steps of Government House. And I remember I'd only just been here for about 2 months when this whole big debate erupted, and I hot-footed it, as the reporter and me, allowed, to Parliament House, and I doorstepped Belinda. She won't remember because there were lots and lots of different people wanting to speak to her, and she was very gracious. She did actually do an interview with me on my phone, so thank you for that. And last but not least, we have, to my far left, Dr. Scott Blackwell. He's a respected WA palliative care physician. He was a member of the state expert panel on VAD and now is charged, if I can be tabloid for a minute, as the VAD czar for WA. So he will be overseeing the implementation of the legislation here in WA, and I'm sure that when Scott is given a chance to speak, he will tell you about that journey. So, audience, please welcome our panellists. Now, we have an hour and 45 minutes this evening, and I'd like to spend some of that time to allow our panel to share their stories and perspectives. And we will do that in just a moment, but I also believe that it is an important space and place for you in the audience who've given up your time this evening to come along. In the work that I've done in this sector, I'm often absolutely amazed, blown away by the fact that actually people are dying to talk. Excuse the horrible pun. It doesn't take a lot to scratch the surface and find that people are not what we think, that people don't want to talk about death. I think they do want to talk about death. We need to provide the platform, so we'd like to provide a platform tonight for people in the audience to tell us their experiences or share their ideas. But I'd like to remind everyone, as Liz also said at the beginning, that whilst this topic needs to be debated openly, we would like everyone to respect other people's opinions and views. Now, without further ado, let's hear from our panel. And Belinda, I'm going to start with you and ask you to share your story with us, please. Death and dying is often seen as the preserve of the elderly or the terminal ill. It's not something that you actively find young people participating in, but that's not your story, is it?
No. I have to admit that it's sometimes weird being someone, like I'm 29 this year, and to find myself talking about issues that tend to affect the generation of my mother, who was 63 when she died. And it's something that I think that young people absolutely should be more and more interested in. I'd love to see more young faces in all of these kinds of events, and it is happening. But yeah, it was a very strange way that I came to be involved and aware of all of these kinds of issues. It was actually because of my mother. I guess I could just tell you about what happened.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I was 23 years old. I'd just finished studying at UWA, and 8 days after I graduated, my mother Maria was diagnosed with terminal stage 4 breast cancer. She was in a lot of pain, and it was a very sudden diagnosis, but anyway, she had a tumour in her spine that was growing between 2 vertebrae, and it grew so big that it broke her spine in 2 places. So she was in a lot of pain. I can't overstate her pain. She was in a specialist palliative care facility in Metro Perth. She had incredible care from all of the palliative care staff. Unfortunately, there came a time about 1.5 months after her diagnosis, so we're talking end of March 2016, the oncologist sat us down and told my mum that she had several weeks left to live. And this was 60 days after we were told, your mum's got stage 4 cancer. And my mum looked straight into her oncologist's eye and she said, "Can you help me to go quicker?" So I'm there, sitting there, I'm the full-time carer for my mum, 23 years old, just finished uni. And I'm thinking, what on earth does that mean? That can't mean what I think it means, right? That's not even legal. And the oncologist looked back at my mum and said, "I'm sorry, Maria, I can't do what you're asking me to do because it's not legal in Australia," because it wasn't.
Belinda, mum was a nurse, wasn't she? Is that right?
My mum was a nurse with 39 years experience. She worked in aged care, and she was a Catholic her whole life, a full-on Roman Catholic her whole life. So when I heard her say this, I felt like I was hit by a bus because I was, And it was remarkable how calm she was and how convicted she was. Her voice didn't shake. She didn't show any shame. She didn't show any of this kind of thing. And anyway, so that all happened, and the oncologist basically said, "We will keep you as comfortable as we possibly can." 3 days later, she asked her palliative care consultant, "Can you help me to speed up this process?" And he also gave the same answer as if it was, the standard answer, which it was, "I'm so sorry, we can't help you with that particular request, but please know that we're going to keep you as comfortable as we possibly can." And as she continued to decline. About 10 days later, I watched my mother die in extreme pain and visible distress. She was twitching, choking, her eyes were pointing in different directions, her skin was all these different colours. And this went on for 4 hours, and then she died. And I'm sitting there watching her go through this, knowing that she had asked to not have this happen to her, knowing that she kind of knew what was coming or what could happen to her because of her medical background, and seeing the consequences of us not having this option. A year later, a year after I watched my mum die in terrible suffering, and to be denied this choice because it wasn't legal, I found out that the choice that she was asking for became available, or was about to become available, in the state of Victoria, on the other side of our country. And so I was very upset, because when I read the legislation, I found out that mum would have satisfied all of the criteria. She was diagnosed with a terminal illness, she had all the medical checks, she was of sound mind, she was a resident, everything I went through, and she would have qualified. So I walked from Melbourne to Perth in memory of her bravery in asking for help, because that's really what I thought she was doing. She was asking for help, and I think that was really brave.
And that was the push, was it? The fact that in Victoria, just a few months later, the legislation was passed, and it was recognised that for people in your mum's condition, that was the most humane option. Is that what actually got you started down that campaign path?
It was the realisation that, so mum died on the 10th of April 2016, and then the law became available in Victoria. Like, you could go to your doctor if you satisfy the criteria. You could go to your doctor I think it was like the 19th of June 2019. So my mum missed out on dying peacefully by 3 years and 3,500 kilometres. How is that fair? And so I just, I was like, it's not that far, I'll just walk it, to show everybody that it's really not that far, and that people here should have the same rights as the people here.
Belinda, what was the response on your walk?
It was pretty good. You mean from like the general public and politicians and everything? Yeah. Well, I walked holding a white rose to show, like in memory of my mum, to show that I wanted to raise awareness for the need for this choice in Western Australia, the same choice that people had in Victoria. And I think the effect of that, along the way, so it took me 70 days to walk, along the way I would talk to the media, talk to politicians, every politician I could find. I talked to the public, I talked to the media, even people who oppose voluntary assisted dying. And I think, what kind of response did I get? Because I was talking about a real person, and someone who I loved very much, and someone who, I was someone who always showed respect. When I was talking to people, and my mum showed, she didn't sit there and throw a tantrum. She respectfully asked for something, and she was denied lawfully what she asked for, and she respected that too. And I think having that approach meant that I was able to have these really effective, open and sincere, really real conversations about voluntary assisted dying. And the response I was getting from the public all along the way was overwhelmingly that people needed to talk about this. They didn't feel like they could because of the fact that it wasn't legal, not in Western Australia yet anyway. The response I got was, because I was so frank about what happened and I wasn't afraid to share every single dirty detail, people, 75% of people that I'd meet along the way would kind of pull me around the corner of the cafe and say, me too, my grandma, my sister, my son, my mother, all of these people. And it still happens even 2 years later. People will stop me in the street occasionally and say, oh my God, I saw what you did and I need to tell you about my grandfather. And then they sit there and they tell me an identical story. That's the kind of response that I get. And I think that's something that drives me to continue whenever an opportunity arises for me to talk about my mum's story, like I've talked about until I'm blue in the face. But I will keep doing it, because if more and more people can know that they're not alone, that they share this experience with so many people in the community, then we can have open conversations about it like we're doing tonight, and we can make it better for everyone.
So what does it make you feel like? I think she needs a clap, guys. Thank you very much for sharing that. It's a very powerful depiction of why we need to be having this conversation today. What did it make you feel like when you see now that WA is on the cusp and that, Queensland and South Australia are also beginning to have that conversation?
I think we've come so far as a state, as a nation, in having the courage to face in my life, one of life's most difficult questions. I remember sitting in my room in 2016-17 after Mum died and looking online about the Netherlands, about Colombia, about Canada, the USA. I know that they're different systems and I know that we can't compare this and that, but I remember thinking to myself, there is no way in Australia, this is before Victoria legalised voluntary assisted dying, there is no way in Australia that we could ever talk about this openly. There is no way in Australia that we're ever going to legalise this. And then fast forward a few years later and here we are talking about it at the Disrupted Festival of Ideas, which is super cool. I think that I'm so proud. Like, how do I feel? I feel proud. I'm sorry, there's very likely to be people in the audience tonight who don't support voluntary assisted dying, and that's totally fine. But my feeling is that I'm proud of us as a community of Australians or Western Australians, whatever it is, that we're having the courage to talk about something that's really, really difficult, that's very uncomfortable, that brings up a lot of emotions, so much. I mean, like, family is such a messy thing sometimes, and the fact that people have been willing to talk about this, not only amongst themselves, in their own families, in their communities, but to a politician that they've never met before. It's been really heartening to see that this has been this really amazing opportunity for us to learn as a community how to interact with the political system in a way that is empowering for us. And I've been following, the developments we've been having in every state. Things are really starting to ramp up in the other states, and I think that this is a really good thing to see in the community, that we're more and more willing to speak up. And I think, Kathy, I'm such a big fan of your work. Every little bit that we can do to raise awareness, whether that's talking about it at a festival, sharing what's happened to us in our own families, real stories, in film, books, in the media, I think all of this contributes to that growing courage, because I think that's what it takes, courage to face these really difficult issues.
Thank you very much for that. Really appreciate it. We will probably come back to you a little bit later on.
Thank you.
I'd like to introduce Professor Samara now. Samara, your research over the years has focused more and more on the need to demedicalise death and personalise it much more and make it a responsibility which is not just an individual responsibility or a family responsibility, but the responsibility of all of us as a community living together. Can you tell us what you've found?
Thank you, Rita. Can you hear me? No? Plugged in? It's not on? No. Yeah, it's on now. Yep. Good evening, everybody. I'm really happy to be here because research is mainly on you, the consumers. What is it that you want from health services, from palliative care services? And I bring this perspective to palliative care. Last year, may I just start with really sharing with everybody here, we did palliative care review for the state from the consumer perspective. And 400 people answered the survey. And those who have had a loved one die and had gone through palliative care, they had much better care, much better quality of life than if they didn't have any palliative care services. So this is a really big tick from the consumers about how well they have been looked after. Now, is it consistent across the spectrum? We don't have enough of them, basically. But is it the role of just palliative care to look after us? It's not really. So let's sort of begin with the end in mind. We all want a good death. But of course, before we need a good death, we really want to be able to have good quality of care and good quality of life until we get there. But death by itself is a social event with a medical component. It's not a medical event with a social component. So it is everyone's responsibility in the community to make sure we are part of the journey of people until their death. It doesn't happen only at that stage. It happens from diagnosis. So when somebody has a terminal illness, particularly when there's no cure, and as Rita said, I chair the board of the Motor Neuron Disease Association. where basically at diagnosis people know they are dying because at the moment still there's no cure. These people are living with dying all the time. And, you know, all the staff that we have on board and all palliative care services work with them. But we need to start much earlier so that by the time they reach death, they're well looked after. They're well, you know, they are part of a community that care. And hence why led me to co-found the compassionate communities in the Southwest, whereby every single member needs to know how to look after somebody who is caring for someone who's dying, and who is grieving. It's a continuum. It doesn't stop at death. It doesn't stop with the patient. It's the whole family that needs to be looked after and being part of that continuum of care. So we really need to think differently about who is responsible for what, and the community has a major responsibility, and your voice needs to get there. We need to be able to accept help, and this is, I think, one of the problems in general with the Western culture. When you ask somebody, are you okay? Do you need help? The first thing that comes to your mind, oh, I'm right, mate, you know, like to just say it the way.
That's just Aussie culture, isn't it? It's not really.
And that doesn't help because, you know, when you say that, you've immediately shut down all the social networks around you that could be helpful. And from the project that I'm leading in the Southwest about the compassionate community connectors, the connectors are people in the community who have a lot of experience, you know, helping people to die the way they want to die. And, they're saying that a lot of people really want to help, but it's just they don't feel that the acceptance of help comes really naturally from people. So it's almost we need to change the culture and get people to say, yes, I need help, but maybe not now, could you ask me next week? Don't say no, because you really, the whole community need to be more death literate, which means know a lot better about how to deal with death in the community, and they need to be grief literate. How do they support those loved ones, you know, once anybody has gone away, you know, because the job is not finished for the community. We are part of it, and we all need to be part of that. So the responsibility is not just about, you know, palliative care being there present for every single person of us. We need to work collaboratively, and this is the essence of a compassion community, how we can bring everybody into this conversation. And, you know, it's a choice how people want to basically die, but we really need to make sure we have everything in place for somebody when they reach this stage so that they can make a really informed decision about how they want to die. And the family is all okay with that as well. So this is where, you know, my message tonight is that the community, you know, we really need to take ownership of death and dying. And this is where we're not, because you know, we have been for a long time a death-denying society. But the more it's part of our life, the more we can, you know, basically embrace this and be well, you know, informed about all our options and also what kind of care we can give to our neighbor. That will make the whole trajectory much easier for everybody, for the one who is dying, for the one who is caring, and those who are basically looking at them, you know, like supporting them in that stage. So,
Samar, if I can be a bureaucrat for a moment, sounds expensive, is it?
It's on the opposite, yeah, because the communities, its help is more sustainable. You know, you don't pay somebody, you know, to actually help. You don't pay your neighbor to help you. It's just part of who we are. We want to help each other, but the people don't know how to do it. And this is why that, you know, I'm really pushing now for a big drive for community education in terms of how can you be more death literate? How can you help people, you know, with knowing their values and all this advanced care planning that we talk about? It's a continuous discussion about their preferences, their wishes, and this will change over time. It's not set in concrete at one particular time and then it doesn't change. It's a conversation that we need to keep asking each other. So how do you see things, you know, would be happening for you, even for a young person who's not necessarily, you know, have got a terminal illness or anything like that. But we don't have these conversations. It's just because, again, we don't have the skills or we're well equipped. So I think this review of palliative care services last year, there is a lot there that's come out, in terms of how do we support family carers to be able to provide the care that people need, and basically, how do we reduce hospital admissions, I mean, people who are dying do not need to go to the hospital if they have really good support in the community. This is important. Death in a hospital is not really the answer. Some people, it could be their choice, but, in general, I think, most people would like to die at home if they have the support from the community. And this is where basically we're trying to bring everybody to speed about how can you be, a compassionate helper in your community when there is somebody around you who is dying, instead of feeling that, you don't have the skills, you don't feel adequate to approach the subject and ask them, how can I help you? I think this is just a different way of looking at it in that sense.
Can you give us some concrete examples? You've worked across the state, but you can talk a little bit about Albany, who I think are really leaders in this, and Bunbury as well.
Yeah, so again, Albany have got really a great work on compassionate community and with their local government. Again, Bunbury is another, community that we have here. And on the 7th of August, which coincides with Dying to Know Day, which is on the 8th of August, it's an annual event whereby we improve the death literacy of the community. We are holding a statewide forum in Bunbury on how do you start up a compassionate community in your area? How do you make those links with health services and work together? How do you make those links with local government, who really should be at the forefront of basically helping, being compassionate city, for instance, as well. Again, how do you console people who are grieving? Some people really mean it well, but they say the wrong things, and basically it backfires. This is, I think, the first event that we've held in WA, whereby, because I'm always asked by even health services, how do you start a compassion community? My answer is, it's the community that needs to start it, not a health service, but you are partners in it. And you live in that community. So you are health professionals, but you are part of that as well. You are living, playing, eating with, all these people. So I think we'll see the results of this, how many people can go back and feel they have the skills to start compassionate communities in their own areas. And it brings everybody together. Everybody has a role to play when it comes to that. So.
Thank you very much for that, Summer. And I'm hoping that you guys are taking notes, because I'd like you to ask lots of questions at the end. I'm going to move on to Kathy Henkel now. Your introduction to this ultimate and final journey was very different from Belinda's. It was a personal and very powerful journey for you, and quite difficult. I'm going to hand over to you and listen to that.
All right, thank you. Thank you for inviting me here. So my mother, Laura, she called me up one day, and she lived in Ballin on the other side of the country, and said, come on over, I've got something I want to say, and bring a camera. She knew I was a professional filmmaker, and I had made a previous film about her, and so she had this, and her husband, my dad, was a filmmaker, so she had the idea that film was important. But she called me over and said, put the camera on, and she started to talk about how she decided that she'd had enough and it was time to go, and she wanted to go in her own way, at a time of her choosing, and she wanted to do it there in her little flat in Ballina.
Kathy, just stopping you there. She wasn't actually considered terminally ill.
No, she wasn't ill at all. No, she was fine. I mean, she was well. She had a very strong physical body. She was starting to have mobility issues. Her feet were quite swollen and there was pain there. She had she was worried her eyesight was going. Basically, my mum was a really, I would say, a nonconformist, free thinker, but a very smart woman. And she took one look at what lay ahead for her ageing. And she had just recently had a fall in Europe and had pneumonia, which is the two really big triggers often for the elderly to see, it brings death closer because of the body's inability to recover quickly from a fall and from pneumonia. And my mum had had both of those. But at the time, she wasn't ill. She was well. But clearly that's not legal, and she also wanted me to be with her. So I had to say no, and I did that thing of, no, we can't do that. And came back here quite traumatised by the conversation, not knowing, even willing to talk to anybody about it. I was very concerned and shamed and confused and quite frightened, actually. And then a strange thing happened. Many of you will remember Dr. David Goodall, who was a West Australian 104-year-old who decided he wanted to end, he'd had enough, and he went to Switzerland. And it was, a program was made about it on a foreign correspondent on the ABC, and my mother saw the program, and then she called me up and said, I want to go to Switzerland. I want what he had. And so that began really a very different kind of conversation, because that was legal and we could be with her, and then we started to look at what the Swiss option entailed and so forth. And at the same time, I was still really reluctant to engage with all this. At that same time, Belinda arrived in Perth, and I went down to Parliament House, and she'll remember, and I accosted her and we had a chat, but I listened to her speak about her mother's story, and it was the first time when I sort of realised that my mother was in fact offering me something that could be a gift of a death that didn't have to involve suffering and waiting until she had those traumatic events. But anyway, it took, as the film evolves, and the film is still available on iView if you have not seen it yet. But as the film evolved,
I think we've got a clip, haven't we?
Yes, I'll introduce the clip just to say that she did ask me and my daughter, who's also a filmmaker, to make the film about it, and she was very insistent about that. And we came at that reluctantly, but in the end, we decided to do it. So this short clip was put together by the ABC just to sort of give a summary of the content of the film. So perhaps we could play the clip now. When my mother came back from her trip to Europe, she had had pneumonia over there and it was a very serious bout. She suddenly felt very old.
My eyes have lost their sparkle. I've got a sort of permanent headache. I'm not able to work up the interest in anything. It's not fun anymore.
Then, she called me up and said, I need to talk to you. Bring a camera. I have something I want to say.
This needs to be made public, and the most effective way of making anything public nowadays is not to write a book, is to make a film. And I am very, very privileged to have a daughter and a granddaughter who are filmmakers. Therefore, I feel really almost obliged.
I thought that maybe if we loved you enough, you might change your mind.
Look, Laura!
Hello. There's no way that you can have me forever. There's no way.
Right.
It's got to happen.
But you've got so much life left in you.
I have to die. There's no way that I can avoid it. And I would rather face it now when I am compos mentis and prepared for it.
She was going to do this anyway, so I don't think we had much choice. It was support her or walk away.
Yes, here's the green light. I confirm the date of 19th December 2019 for your assisted voluntary death. I couldn't think of a better way to die.
Hello.
Yeah, I've got a tale to tell as well. Hello, everybody. Hello.
The people that are here are the people that just love her, and I think she's having a great time. It just seems crazy that this is the last time we get to see her. It's hard saying goodbye to someone.
I will miss you and love you forever, and I'm proud of the fact
that you are no shrinking violet.
The choice you're making is incredibly bold, incredibly controversial, and brings up a plethora of differing emotions, sometimes on an hourly basis. But the one thing I'm so grateful for is this. It's a wonderful and rare thing to be able to share these lessons and say thank you while you're here, rather than in a eulogy at a funeral you won't attend.
I've had a good innings, but I can do one last thing for the planet by dying in a way that may pave the way for the law to be changed so that everybody can have this choice locally and not have to go to Switzerland to benefit. So I raise my glass and I'll say goodbye with...
So we made a 2 by 1 hour film about her decision process, my daughter and I coming slowly and kind of difficultly to support her, all the things that we did, and the preparation for her death. And really, she gave me and my daughter a huge amount of support and time to prepare for it, so that by the time we got to Switzerland, and she had that big, crazy Mad Hatter's Tea Party farewell, which was actually a huge amount of fun. She loved it, and all her friends came, and everyone got to say all the things that you'd say normally at a funeral, but she was there to hear it, and Mum loved that. You know, she really had a great time with the party, and she was just so ready. And in Switzerland, she was just so focused on this, what she wanted to do. And of course, then we recorded right up to her death, which was a really, really a good death and very peaceful, and left me with a profound sense of peace and just gratitude for being able to, and I've said this to Belinda as well, to be able to say goodbye to a parent in such a way is such a gift. It was a great experience for my daughter too, who'd been quite fearful of death before all this, and now she's, you know, witnessed a death and been through this and has far less fear of it. But the main thing Mum wanted was to speak out for the elderly and to say, if an elderly person is saying, look, I've reached this point, I've had enough, I want to go, I'm ready to go, that they be given the respect to be able to say that, and that family members don't shut them down and say, no, don't say that, or somehow, you know, try to dissuade her. She really said that we can't understand it because we're young, but that people will reach a point where they know they're ready to go, and that they should be listened to and respected for that. And of course she wanted that this choice would be available in Australia, which it's certainly not. But and she really just wanted to get the conversation happening. So it's been on the ABC, both on ABC Plus and then again on the main channel. And my daughter and I have received thousands of messages. And the ABC is saying to us, for every one message written, it represents tens of thousands of people who don't write. So there's just been such a huge, overwhelming response from people saying thank you for making it, thank you for normalising the death process, thank you for you know, sharing what it's like to go through this experience, and so on. So many messages, and it is overwhelming. I haven't read them all, but I've read enough to really get the sense that it's causing quite a you know, a ripple effect, and that people are talking. And we've set up a space on a website called Laura's Kitchen Table, where viewers who want to continue to talk are coming together and talking to each other about all kinds of issues. And that's now growing, and the film's now playing in New Zealand next week. I'm going to be going there, like international travel. Can you believe it? You know, it's fingers crossed we don't have a case that stymies all this, but at this point we're due to go over there. So the New Zealand radio and TV and press are coming to us now and starting the conversation, because in New Zealand it's also being discussed, and there's a bill coming forward, and then we have an international distributor and will go on its international journey. So it's a way to go, yeah. But I'd say my mum's really very pleased with the way that people are talking about it, and that it is sparking, you know, these debates and conversations. Yeah, so that's it.
I mean, I think that was very powerful for me, which is that actually Mum started a conversation. She knew she was actually starting a conversation. The legislation that's coming into place in July wouldn't have affected her. She wouldn't have been able to, under the legal framework, be able to do what she did.
No, and she was aware that she said, look, I'm a pioneer and this is going to be a long way down the track. But like any debate, she made the reference to when we first talking about rights for gay and lesbian people way back, you know, when people were actually being quite cruel. There was the idea that, you know, we could have gay marriage was just unthinkable. And we have, you know. And as Belinda was saying, the conversation around voluntary assisted dying seemed unthinkable years ago. So my mum's idea was that at some point down in the future, we'll have a humane enough society and government to allow people. And all she wanted was that people could have this choice, that you wouldn't have to wait to have a terminal illness affect you and suffer and go down that choice would be available. That's what she wanted.
And that choice, I'm going to talk a little bit about that, because this is something I think that people are quite exercised about, which is that should we have this choice? And there are people from all sides of the spectrum who have an idea about what that choice should entail. I'm going to bring Scott in here, if I may. You've been engaged at the heart of the initial discussions that the WA government had about the rollout, about whether VAD was going to be something that was possible. Can you explain, first of all, for everybody, including me, what actually is the actual legislation?
How long have we got?
Liz is going to tell us.
Yeah. Look, I think if I can go back to the work that we've done in the implementation group, and we started at a point where we looked at a person, and that person was a West Australian person, and that person was going to die soon. And they were suffering in a manner that was unacceptable to them. And these are, in fact, the criteria of voluntary assisted dying in Western Australia. There's a few others like age and so on. And essentially that's pretty much how we've focused all the work that we've done over 18 months in a very large number of areas. So it's been an interesting piece of work because from the beginning, the for and against argument disappeared for us overnight. And so we as a group looked at how we might turn this legislation. It's actually quite crazy really, because legislation's awful stuff, the way it's written and so on, and to actually turn that into a reality for that person that we were focusing on. And I think that was the sort of key piece of work that we needed to do. And it was a massive piece of work, so we divided into eight streams, and each group has produced part of what we are now actually just on the doorstep of actually seeing go live. And I have to say I'm really happy with the work that's been done, and I have to say that the quality of the work that's been done is really excellent, and I'm glad I had the people that I had to work with me, because their contribution has been immense. But the legislation itself really is quite restrictive, as you say, and it is about that person, and those are the restrictions. And I suppose the other important points about it, I think that are a reality. Capacity is a very big point. The fact that you have to have capacity to know what you're doing at every point along the way, right up to taking the medication. So there are virtually 3 or 4 steps along the way where your capacity is judged. So I think that perhaps I should just run you through a person going through this, and it'll just give you some of the characteristics of what it is. I'd like to share with you, I guess, a couple of things that I liked to bring to the group that we worked with, and that was, I guess, 2 attributes of being a human being that I think were very important to this work. And the first was really honesty. And I'll read you a little quote, and then I'll tell you where it comes from. In a time of universal deceit, telling the truth becomes a revolutionary act. Is that appropriate to today? It's George Orwell. So the world hasn't changed, but in end-of-life care, honesty is really vital and important. I think the other attribute that I wanted to always bring to the work that we did, and I hope is expressed in the way that it actually works, was the attribute of kindness. And I think that everything we do in end-of-life care should be done, you know, with a sense of kindness. And I wanted to give you another quote, which is one of my favourite all-time quotes, and it was probably first introduced to me by my late wife, actually. But I think probably kindness is my number one attribute in a human being. I'll put it before any of the things like courage, bravery, generosity, or anything else. Kindness, that simple word, to be kind, it covers everything to my mind. If you're kind, that's it. And that's from Roald Dahl. And I think Roald Dahl has a lot of other quotes about kindness and other good attributes of human beings, but that one really appeals to me, and it's one that we tried to bring to the work. So today I'll just tell you a little brief story about this person, this West Australian person, and we know they're going to die soon, and they are suffering. I think the important thing about the suffering, and suffering has been a big part of my life. Fortunately for me, it's been other people's suffering because I've had very little suffering myself. But they're suffering in a manner unacceptable to them. And I think that's a point that we need to make fairly clearly, that it is your suffering, and whether it's body, mind or spirit, if that suffering is unacceptable to you, it qualifies in this legislation. And I think that's really important. And so our person decides they don't want to suffer anymore, and this story is actually set in about 6 weeks' time because it can't happen yet. But they've learnt that within WA that you can, in actual fact, if you're in this person's circumstances, ask to be given a medication that will end your life. So our person goes along to their doctor and says, I'd like to access voluntary assisted dying. This is going to be a big shock for lots of doctors. We've been educating a lot in recent times because, frankly, this is not a question that we get as we've had that question so many times, but we haven't had it in that form where there is now somewhere to go. And so it is tough. So the doctor will probably say something like, well, you know, if he's actually done the course and he's able to help them with voluntary assisted dying, that will be a different conversation. But he's more likely to say, look, I haven't done the education, I can't help you with this, but let's talk about all the options here. And I think that's a fair conversation. And the doctor will run whoever it is through active treatment options, palliative care options, and voluntary assisted dying. And then if the person comes back and says, look, I still really want to go down this line of voluntary assisted dying, then the doctor will say something like, well, I can't help you with that, but I have 2 obligations under the Act. And this is what we really are educating the profession to understand. And those 2 obligations will be that that doctor needs to register that as the first request with the Voluntary Assisted Dying Board. And they'll be able to do that online. We've invested in a very amazing information management system, so the doctor will be able to do that, even though they won't be able to proceed with it. And he'll also then need to say, and I'll give you this information which will explain to you how to proceed. In that information, I think there are a number of ways in which you can proceed, but I'm going to choose just one of them because it's my favourite. Because one of the things that we've created in this, and it's something that we have created and developed in our own style from a service that happens in Victoria and in Canada, and that's the service of a care navigator. And we will have operational from the 1st of July a voluntary assisted dying care navigator service. And I have to say, these are the kindest people that I've ever met, the people that we've managed to recruit for this, and they are in training and the development stage. And these are people that the person requesting voluntary assisted dying will be able to connect with, and they will be able to connect them with doctors who have done the training, who will be able to take them through the process, and will be able to help them with any little hurdles or hiccups along the way. So that person will be available to them. The care navigators will also be available to healthcare services who may have questions about voluntary assisted dying, may need some help with it, to doctors, to nurses, And so they're going to be universally useful. And they will be very useful to the public in the manner that they'll be the main source through which information on voluntary assisted dying gets to be well known within the public. One of the things that happened in Victoria's legislation, and ours is different, was that doctors were not allowed to raise the subject of voluntary assisted dying. And so we hear the stories from people who have eventually gone through the process of voluntary assisted dying, or at least their families, that they are really happy that we actually developed our legislation with some advantages over Victoria's, and that's certainly one of them. So through the care coordinator, our person will then get to see a person that will be their coordinating practitioner, coordinating doctor. The coordinating practitioner and the consulting practitioner who will come next both have similar processes to go through, but the coordinating practitioner will actually follow the person through to the point of prescribing the substance and so on. So they will go through an assessment process which will tick off all those boxes: age, have to be Western Australian, have to have been here resident for 12 months, and so on and so forth. And you can read all those bits and pieces. They have to be very certain that these people have capacity, and if there's a question about that, they have the ability to refer them to an expert in that field. But to be quite honest with you, working in medical practice, most doctors are thinking about the capacity of people every day of their life. They know generally, so I think it'll be not that common that capacity is questioned, or if it is, then geriatricians and psychiatrists will probably get the job of really looking at that. So once the person gets through all those steps, and another particular point in the process will be, is this person really voluntarily doing this? The exclusion of coercion is the big fear of people when it comes to voluntary assisted dying. Let me tell you, if you look at the actual experience across the world, the only coercion that anybody ever talks about is families trying to talk their loved ones out of doing this. You very, very rarely see any examples of coercion of people into it, coercing granny into voluntary assisted dying so you can get the hands on the will. Look, really? It actually is. The process is just too hard for that to sort of really happen. So once all those things are ticked off, on our amazing information management system, the doctor has put in all this information, presses the button, and off it goes to the voluntary assisted dying board, and within a short period of time gets accepted. The voluntary assisted dying board is actually an oversight board. It isn't actually judging yes or no whether this can happen. It is actually just making sure that the process is fully followed. So then the person, either from that doctor or through the care navigator, again finds a consulting doctor who runs through a very similar process. Within this process, there's one other thing that I like to mention that I haven't, and that is that the subject of bereavement will be brought up. The question, yes, this is your choice, and yes, you qualify. Who in your family is at risk if you actually go through this? Should we be putting something in place to help them? Should we, look, I work in aged care and I write 150 plus death certificates a year. And my last key performance indicator is how well the families grieve afterwards. It is so important. So we've built that into the training, and it's really important that we understand that the person themselves, if they identify somebody within the family, then they can be helped into counselling services or whatever to make sure that when we get to the end of this process that we haven't created another problem. And I think that's really, really important. This is a very important human experience that we're going through. The second doctor will run through pretty much the same and go through a lot of the same questions, and then comes a written declaration, which they usually do with the coordinating doctor. So there's been a first request and then a second request with the doctors, and then the written declaration, and then the coordinating doctor has a final check and goes through and checks that everything is all the boxes are ticked. The voluntary assisted dying board accepts that, and then the prescription can be provided. The choice is made at that stage whether that's going to be a self-administration process, which is in Victoria the most common, in Canada the least common. Everybody has slightly different legislation. And so with the coordinating doctor, the person will make that decision as to whether it will be a self-administration process or a doctor administration process, and appropriate arrangements can be made either way. If it is a self-administration process, then usually a contact person will be appointed, so that obviously the person themselves, it's a fair burden for them to actually be responsible for looking after the substance, and also preparing it themselves and taking it themselves. So there needs to be somebody else. And also, a lot of people actually die before they take the substance because their suffering isn't as bad as they think. And a lot of people actually will go through this process as a backstop, something that I've got it there, so I know that if it gets too tough, I can take it. But they don't. In Victorian figures, 35% of people die without actually taking the substance. So there needs to be somebody to mop up the fact that the substance is sitting there in a lockbox in the house afterwards, and that's part of the process as well. So as you can see, we've thought about a lot of the safety aspects of this. The prescription goes to the statewide pharmacy service. The statewide pharmacy service will run out of one of the teaching hospitals in Western Australia, and again, I've met the pharmacists concerned, and the pharmacists will run through with the person and their contact person, if it's going to be a self-administration, what the substance is, how it should be handled, give it to them in a locked box. Only the person themselves or their contact person can hang on to the key. The pharmacy has it as well. The pharmacy service may take it out to the person themselves. And again, I can see that we've chosen very well, because the team of pharmacists who will provide this service, and it's not something that they like going to your pharmacy and putting your prescription over there and then going to the next counter and getting it back. It will take half an hour to an hour for them to actually work through it again, to actually really treat these people as human beings and make sure that they know exactly how this process will. And again, the quality of the people that I can see that we've chosen to do this work. Kindness is again the human attribute that shines through, and I feel very confident that people will be well looked after. So then the person may decide to do this at home, and they may take the medication at home, and when they take the medication, they will become unconscious quite quickly, within minutes, in fact, and they will die within an hour or two. I believe the substance itself, which is usually mixed in liquid form, is quite bitter, and people are usually offered their favourite drink to take afterwards, to take their, so if it's a beer you want, it's a beer you'll have. So for me, champagne, sorry. But so then, as I say, if the substance is taken, then it then becomes a normal process. The death certificate is provided usually by the coordinating doctor. If that's not possible, then somebody else. That's also thought about in advance and pre-arranged so that it can all happen quite smoothly. And the cause of death is not written as voluntary assisted dying. The cause of death in Western Australia is different than some of the other jurisdictions. The cause of death will be the disease of the person that led them to being able to make the decision. And the reason for that is totally a privacy reason. It has in the ministerial expert panel days, we had a lot of discussion with the cultural people and the disabled people and all the other people we had in that group. And so that it was said that this is something we may want to be private. Mm-hmm. And so it can be, if you want it to be private, but it certainly will be private on your death certificate, which can be needed for other public sorts of things. So, and of course the board gets to be notified. If you don't take it, obviously, if you die and you haven't taken the medication, then the contact person needs to tell the statewide pharmacy, and that mops up that potential risk. So that's without lots of details. That's just personalising. what the journey may be in Western Australia from the 1st of July. I'm happy we can talk about questions about that later on.
Scott, I've got a question, which is who exactly is going to be able to access this? What's the actual framework for being able to take this? 6 months?
So, yeah. So for most diseases it's 6 months, but for people with neurodegenerative diseases, motor neurone disease and so on, they're 12 months. Capacity is a really important point, so that really excludes dementia, which probably, because dementia's a long journey and you don't have capacity. You may want at the beginning of the journey to access voluntary assisted dying, and it's too early, and by the time you get there it'll be too late. So, but the other neurodegenerative diseases like it's a little muscle in my leg there. I've been running hard at hockey this week. Looking at the figures from other places, and I expect it'll be the same here, the majority of people are largely cancer sufferers. The second most common are the neurodegenerative group, and then there's a mixture of others that make up the other 10, 15%, I suppose.
And in terms of the starting, the process, how long does the whole process take from the time that someone says,
Obviously,
I'm ready?
In Western Australia we don't know yet, but we've tried to make it so that it is perhaps a little bit more straightforward here than the Victorian legislation has a little bit more, has a few more delays in it, but essentially the legislation says it can't be quicker than 9 days. The average in Victoria is around about 2 weeks.
From start to finish, all those checks, for all those doctor visits?
That's the average. I think it's 14. I think it's 14, or it might be a bit longer than that. Some people take a lot longer because they think about it, and they may not take it at all. They just want to have this security. So yes, it's. But the quickest you could do, I think having 9 days in the legislation is a bit of a joke, because I think getting through that in 9 days would be a bit of a miracle. But there are sub-clauses in the legislation that if somebody was really suffering badly and they were pretty close to the end of life, that this could be, streamlined a bit, and dispensation could be given to be able to take the medication earlier.
And you will have run the numbers. You've done a lot of work, obviously, in the run-up to this. You'll have run the numbers. How many people in WA are you expecting to take up?
First, let me say this is not a game changer in end-of-life care. It's a 1 to 2%er. And it will probably, I guess, looking at the Victorian figures and downsizing them to our I suppose we may be looking at 40 or 50 people, maybe growing from that in future years. But it may be more than that. Victoria was surprised that they actually had a bit of a queue when they first started. And I expect there'll be a few hiccups and a few clunky bits along the way, but we're as prepared as we can be to make a good start on the 1st of July.
And is there, just thinking about WA, is there a different way that you're going to be approaching this for the rural and remote communities?
Yeah, we've got the biggest rural and remote I think we're the second biggest jurisdiction in the world as far as providing services rural and remotely, yes. And each of the people that we've talked about will be able to go rural if we need them to, so that we can actually provide that service as equitably as we can. Samara and I both know that equitable health services in rural and remote Western Australia don't exist across any service, but we do the best we can, and it is a massive state. And but we will travel people as if a lot can be done electronically. There are laws that prevent certain discussions, the Commonwealth laws that prevent certain discussions about the actual substance itself, and we've worked out the nuances of how to work around that. But if we need to send a care navigator to Kununurra, we'll send a care navigator to Kununurra. If we need to send a pharmacist, if we need to send a doctor, yeah, it'll happen. So, and the funding stream for that has actually been created.
And just one final question before I open up the floor. using Kathy's watch because I don't have one and I can't see the clock up there, we will open up the floor for questions in just a moment. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about the cultural aspect and whether within all the work that you've done, you've looked at that and how you're going to be able to navigate different communities. I mean, you know, WA is a state which has many, many different people from all sorts of different communities.
Yeah. Let me talk about that backwards. Firstly, internationally, this is a white Caucasian choice in the majority of cases, which is interesting. It's not, and as you can see, the countries that have actually legalised it now all probably have dominant cultures in that sort of way. So that's the first thing. So the cultural aspects of it were debated very long and hard in the ministerial expert panel days before the legislation is there. The legislation allows for this to be culturally and linguistically appropriately delivered, but it is, and so we do have written into our program, you know, interpreters and these sorts of things. How I suspect our care navigators will be on a very interesting journey because it's going to be a case-by-case thing, really. And if somebody of a different culture pops up, then I suspect in the first few years we'll need to learn that. But I think having built in the basic characteristics of honesty and kindness and so on to enable that, rather than to do what health often does, is actually negate it, is actually really what we've tried to do. Because at the end of life, you can't do that. Well, when I say you can't, it happens. But we do need to be able to, to cover those sorts of things. But they will probably be more exceptions to the rule.
You talked about kindness and respect, so...
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Kindness and respect are key, yeah.
Okay, I think you've heard more than enough from me, and what you really need to do is hear a little bit more from our panel. So I'm going to open up the floor for discussions, questions. What I'd like is to remind people about respecting other people's opinions. We want to be able to share all sorts of different ideas here tonight. Just two small requests, which is that if you've got questions, if you can just put your hand up so that the two roving mics on either side of me will be able to find you relatively easily. And also just to stand up and say your name and then what the question is and who you're directing it to. That would be really helpful. Okay, here we go. Okay, this gentleman over here.
Can you hear me? Peter Bian. I'm focusing on what Scott had to say about the...
Just...
Focusing on what Scott had to say about the mode of administration, and you've heard that it can be intravenous in some jurisdictions and oral in other jurisdictions. I'm just wondering, this is a question for Kathy. If when you discussed matters in Switzerland, you were told that it had to be oral, they can't give you intravenous medication unless you're not able to swallow, and even then you can't have a choice of operating the device yourself. The doctor has to give it to you. So it's quite different. If she was told it had to be a larger volume of unpleasant drink, would it have made a difference to her? Would it have made a difference to you or your daughter?
Yes, the conversation was very clearly put, the options were very clearly put to my mother that she could have the oral medication or she could have the intravenous. And she asked the pros and cons and the bitterness and the idea that the oral would take longer. She opted for the intravenous, and she just made jokes about, I have trouble with my veins, and you won't be able to find them. But the anaesthetist who was attending was very good. So she opted for the intravenous, and that she had the champagne, she had the music, she did the whole thing, all the things that she wanted to do. The drip was put in and it was just a saline, and then at the moment where she said, I'm ready, they put the drug into the drip, and she had the lever and she was fully in control of the moment when she pushed the lever, and it went into her system, and it was so quick. It was within 30 seconds. She was still speaking, but within a minute she stopped speaking. It took the last breath. So there was no, and I've watched it obviously hundreds of times when you edit a thing like this. There was not an inkling of suffering or any kind of resistance. Her body just took it.
Just one quick follow-up before we go somewhere else. So the question is,
the question
would
was,
it have made a difference?
No, I think my mother at that point was so determined she would have taken the oral if that had been the only option, but she was pleased that she had another option.
Thank you. Anyone else? Do we have someone over there? Right-hand side there. Thank you.
Roland Crook. Two questions for Dr. Blakely, Dr. Blackwell. Firstly, how do you reconcile your palliative care specialty background with your whole presentation of the process of putting people down? And secondly, you've got people, specialists on hand to hotfoot to the regions to deliver VAD. What provisions are being made to enable palliative care specialists to provide services to the regions? Thank you.
Yeah, two good questions. I suppose the first one's designed to be quite personal, and yes, I've been functioning. I'm actually a GP by trade. I spent the first half of my career delivering babies and the second half of my career sort of working in palliative care, and I've held significant roles in palliative care. And I'm very pleased to say that the palliative care world, as a lot of other service providers who would be opposed to voluntary assisted dying, are not going to deny the care aspect of what they do through this. And voluntary assisted dying is not a service to replace palliative care. And many of the people who actually do take the voluntary assisted dying step do so within the process of palliative care. The palliative care services have the choice not to be part of that, but fairly universally, certainly in Victoria, and certainly from our discussions here, it will be the case that the palliative care service will provide all the care that the person needs, minus that step which may be separate. So from my point of view, I think we are not changing the care parameters of the person at all. We're just allowing them to have this extra choice. And I don't have a personal issue with that as a palliative care provider. So that was the first question. The second question is the regional one. Yeah, look, it's a horny one, that one. But all I can say...
Can you just remind everybody what the second question was?
Yeah, the question was really about the funds we're going to spend on making this available. The number of people that will access voluntary assisted dying in the country will be quite small, so the cost will be quite small. The amount of money that we've spent on preparing for and developing voluntary assisted dying is I think $2 or $3 million. At the same time, we've managed to twist the arm of the Health Department and the Minister for somewhere around about $85 million for extra services in palliative care. And palliative care is still palliative care is the 98%er, It doesn't... That's why I say that voluntary assisted dying is not a game changer, and the financial cost of it to the Health Department, is not going to be massive alongside palliative care. Palliative care will still spend the masses of money that we need to spend on end-of-life care. So I have to say I was one of the arm twisters of the Minister when this subject was first came up, and I have to say we've been moderately successful.
Can I just bring Samar in there? I think you had something to add, did you?
Yes, no, really good question. And I know 80 million has gone on to more palliative care services, but still we are in this situation where what's happening because of, again, not enough resources, we know that a patient is dying and yet they get discharged from palliative care and then readmitted when they get worse. That's not a good scenario. That's not the right way of doing it. But again, because of these funding models that, palliative care is subjected to, it's not able to basically cover the full holistic care that palliative care is about. It's really been truncated into just symptom management or clinical care, and then we don't have, the time for our great palliative care providers to engage into psychosocial support, emotional support, existential support, all that's part of the palliative care definition of care, that basically we keep preaching to the community, this is what palliative care is about, but they're not getting it, And I think, it's like there is a disconnect between the ethos of palliative care, but what people are actually getting on the ground because of these really restrictive funding models. And this is where I'm thinking there is, one way around it is for the community to be able to be really responsive and know how to take care of their own people in their own communities, and expand the capacity of palliative care to go further to help people. So there's something you can do, and there's something what palliative care can do. And this is basically, I think the way forward is that public health approach to palliative care, to cover the whole population. And again, you've got what we call the palliative approach to care, where all the generalist primary care health professionals can be part of that, the care of people in the community. So it's not just the role of specialist palliative care services.
Great, thank you very much for that. I've got a question over here from the front.
My name is Julie. I am a healthcare worker. I'm also a chaplain in training who wants to be involved in the aged care and providing support. You talk about palliative care and holistic care. What does that even look like? And do you just do the secular kind of care that you provide, like psychology or psychiatrists, or do you actually include the whole package, including not just mental health, the economic, the social, the family, but also the spiritual aspect?
Mm-hmm. I think you touched a little bit about that, on that, Scott, when you were talking about thinking about bereavement, counselling within the VAD structure. But is there anything else that you'd like to add to that? And then I'll ask you as well, Samar.
Look, I think it's fair to say, let me first mention the palliative care services. They do work as a multidisciplinary team, and they generally have social workers and chaplains and so on in them. And certainly my 20-odd years experience with Silver Chain, that was the case. Now my main expression is in residential aged care, and that's really hit and miss, dependent upon obviously the provider and so on. So you'll be really welcome in residential aged care. There's a big need, I think, for emotional and spiritual care in residential aged care. We lose a third of our population every year, so we are constantly in a palliative mode. And I think voluntary assisted dying probably won't be expressed in residential aged care very often at all, because few of them have capacity.
Samar, just very briefly. Just very briefly, Samar.
Pastoral care is so important. It's part of that package, that should be provided. But what people have said in this community survey that we did last year, they don't have time to express their fears, their concerns, because it's go, 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 go. Like in hospitals, it's not the right place to talk about their fears, their worries, their preferences, the care that the family carer needs, and the aftercare, the bereavement support. It's not happening. Where it's happening more is, say, in not-for-profit organizations, for instance, Cancer Council, Motor Neuron Disease Association, because we have people who actually visit people at home where these conversations are happening, and that's what palliative care is, part of that palliative approach to care.
Thank you, Samar. I've got a question here in the front.
Hello, my name's Vivian. Thank you for this really important conversation. What you're saying, Dr. Owen, about the community involvement, I think was quite well reflected in your film, Kathy, in the way the family and the friends of Laura came together. But what Dr. Blackwell's just explained to us is that the legislation we're having would not address Laura's choice whatsoever. Why do you think that next step is possible, that is something that we should be looking towards in the future?
So effectively, have you opened up a Pandora's box?
I know we've opened up a Pandora's box. I said that to my mum at the time, and she's like, good, the box needs to be opened.
She was wicked, wasn't she?
She was wicked, yeah. And she knew it was radical and that it would be, I mean, she was very, very supportive of the voluntary assisted dying legislations happening, but she would not have helped her. She would not have qualified. And so I do think it's a longer haul. I know that there's some conservative concerns that what Laura did might somehow affect the voluntary assisted dying debates in that, she represents this slippery slope. I don't think so. I think that all society change goes in stages. Society just changes in progression. So once we get something and it normalises the fact that let's give our suffering people a kind of way out and a choice, then it'll become, what's the next step? The other thing my mum said is wait till the baby boomers all get old. They're not going to go quietly and they're not going to suffer. They're going to be like changing things. So I think we are looking at, as Belinda said, there's an acceleration going on at the moment with legislations popping up everywhere that this is now needed. So perhaps it is a next step. I don't know how quickly, I don't know, but my mum would have been like, yeah, let's move the debate along.
Pandora's box, Scott?
I suspect not in my lifetime, but I suspect in the lifetime of some of the other people in the room who look a little younger than me. Not much, but I do think it'll take, the political process is a conservative one and a slow one. And I suspect that looking at what it's been 20 years or so in Europe before things have changed dramatically, so I suspect that's what we'll see. Yep.
Okay, I've got a question just here in the front.
I'm Philomena. Sorry. I'm just interested, why wasn't dementia, people with dementia considered at this stage? Because that's a real problem. I know there's the need for their capacity to decide at every step, but if you look at dementia, people with dementia, I mean, they are also suffering in their own way.
Great question, thank you.
You want me to?
Yes, Scott.
Because dementia's my space, really. I sort of work with dementia people day in and day out, and I agree with you, and I must admit in the ministerial expert panel days I annoyed them because I kept bringing the subject up, and it was really from the beginning not going to happen because it hasn't happened in any other legislative jurisdiction at the beginning, and it is this capacity question. We did put the argument that if you're going to go down this road, then why, and if you've got advanced care directives, why can't you, when you do have capacity, write it in an advanced care directive, appoint a guardian who can then speak for you, and then you could have say, well, when I get to be like this, I don't want to be here anymore. But that's just, to the political world at the moment, just it would have meant we wouldn't have got the legislation. Clearly, that's pretty much it. Yeah.
Okay, there's a question over there, right at the... Oh, sorry, yes.
Hi, so George McColgan. First off, thank you so much for your engaging discussion. So we see that in Asian cultures, they tend to look after their elderly when they're nearing the end of life, and families tend to take them in and look after them, whereas in Western culture, we're more likely to ship them off to an aged care home and sometimes forget about them. In order to create the compassionate, death-literate societies that you suggest, Samar, do you think we should, as Western cultures, adopt that more of an Asian approach?
It's interesting, we're going like full circle. This is how it used to be even here, in the old times, when you had the extended family, you've had generations living together, and now we've got all these nuclear families, we're all disconnected. So we really need to have, again, work on a really compassionate and connected Western Australia. This is the missing link. There's no connection between people anymore, and we really need to start working on that in our own community and learn from other cultures too. Obviously the Maori culture, and the Irish, they have wonderful way of basically looking after, their loved ones, and also respecting the dying process and really making of it quite a festive sort of way of saying goodbye. So we're all capable of doing it, but it's just changing that culture that it's so set now. It's not difficult. It's just, and this is where, with the Compassion Community Connectors project, they're not just volunteers helping families, they are enhancing their social networks and making them more connected in their own communities so that it's more sustainable when they get to that level as well, when they're dying. It's not about, giving them support and then when they go, the support goes with them. It's about Bob the neighbor is still able to mow the lawn for the family next door, but they don't have the guts to ask this neighbor. It's all about here privacy, confidentiality. We don't want to impose on anybody. But I mean, life is like, what you get, you give. It's just like that. And we really need to get back to those, I don't know, they're old concepts, but they're really great values, to start having it again.
Melinda, what struck me when you were initially talking was that it felt very much like the process with Mum was something that you just had to handle on your own. You really weren't that well supported. Would Samar's compassionate community model have helped?
I was quite alone when I looked after Mum, not necessarily because of a lack of community support and all this kind of stuff, but my family's personal circumstances are quite special. We migrated here. I don't have a grandma, grandpa, uncle, auntie, nothing here. I mean, family, friends and stuff, and distant relatives, but nothing like that. So that was quite unique. Yes, the kind of model that you're describing, that absolutely would have made a difference, I think. I think when I was there, like in the moment of it all, and like you said, when everything's happening so quickly, you don't have time. I basically, because we weren't living in a community as you were describing, I had to build a village. So I had a spreadsheet in my laptop of like every single family friend, best friend, everything that I could count on to not mow the lawn or do groceries for me and all that kind of stuff. I had to do that, otherwise I wouldn't have slept for 2 months. And so, it is really important to have that community support. And I found it interesting just then, when you were saying, should we as a Western society take lessons from what we see in Asian culture? That's something it's really struck me. When I go back to Malaysia, I've got family that live in the village. They don't have access to a hospice. They don't have access to high-grade medical facilities and palliative care and that kind of thing. And so this community model is all that they have. They've become really, really good at it. And so you look at my mum, who, obviously I come from a Chinese background. And my mum used to look at, she'd go to work in aged care and feel a lot of fear about how some of the patients that she was working with were essentially in her as being abandoned by their families here in Australia, in Western society, and that was a completely different treatment to what someone in my family back at home in Malaysia would have. And I think I felt so lucky that I was able to live that experience as someone with an Asian background, with Asian values. I'm not going to let my mum rot or anything do you know what I mean? I'm going to be there for everything. I'm going to be there every day. I was at the hospital every day from 6 a.m. until past midnight. And I think that it's actually possible to do both. I think it's possible to live in Australia with all of these amazing medical facilities, with the resources that we have, with the options that we have, and to still bring in, for what is for me, my traditional cultural values of be there for everything every day. And whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, a lot of self-sacrifice, I guess. Just being really present. I remember we flew in all these members of our family from Malaysia, and it was quite bewildering for all the staff at the hospice because all they saw was all of these Malaysian people coming in and out of my mum's room constantly, all day, every day for 2 weeks. And so we brought that attitude, that approach into my mum's dying process, but in a Western setting with all of the bells and whistles and the extremely high-tech rooms and stuff. I think it's possible in Australia. We have this really amazing opportunity to bring that approach with the resources and the facilities that we have. I don't think that you necessarily need to choose one or the other.
Okay, we are drawing very close to the end. I know there's a question over there. You've been waiting very patiently. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Sandy. I'm actually also a registered nurse as well. So this is a really interesting discussion for me to hear, and it's something I've been really interested in for a really long time. And I guess this is a question for Samar. Sorry, you've been picked on a lot. I'm really
for all the right reasons.
Yes, I'm really interested to hear about more about your compassionate communities. Obviously not tonight, but what I kind of want to know is through what you do, and even other panel members, as briefly as you can make it, what is being done in society to open up the discussion, apart from events like tonight, about death, because we are still really, really afraid as a Western society of bringing up death in our family and saying, what do you want when you die? And unfortunately, sometimes we don't get that good death, okay? Sometimes it's a really traumatic death and families are pushed out of the room because, you know, seeing CPR is too traumatic for them, but perhaps it's more traumatic for them not to see it. I know now that parents are actually invited into the room if their child is undergoing CPR so that they understand what is being done. But we need to open up the discussion with our families, with our friends, with the community about death and saying, you know, it's like cancer years ago. We never used to talk about it. Can't talk about the C word. Now we can't talk about the D word, but we need to, because I know I've had a conversation with my mother, and she's only 73, about her death, which could be 20 years from now, because unfortunately we've got long, good Scottish blood. And, you know, but I've had a discussion with her about what she wants at a funeral, how she wants to be treated if she dies, what she doesn't want done. And I know from my nursing background that there's things that I won't allow to happen to her because of how brutal CPR can be. So, yeah, I'm just interested to hear some sort of discussion around that.
Just very briefly, a couple of sentences.
Thank you. There's a lot happening around the world, and in Australia we have Groundswell. As I said, they've started Dying to Know Day, which is 8th of August. The first time we ran a death festival, whereby we had people come and exactly just have conversations about death, dying, and how everybody has experienced it, and what's the best way of doing it. So the more you break down the stigma and the taboo about this, the more people are really courageous to talk about it. We've involved the schools this year, the young people, to start having that conversation from really early on. We had an art exhibition of how do the young people experience loss of, say, in their family, whether a pet or a grandfather. It was really very, very nice to actually do that and have the whole community involved. So this is what I'm saying. This WA forum that we are having in Bunbury on the 7th of August is about, you know, having more of those conversations so that everybody feels they can go back to their families and share them and making them part of this. It's really difficult to discuss with anybody what are their preferences and wishes? What are their values? It's not something that's easy for somebody to talk about it. And there is a really great website. It's about my values. And it sort of gives you a whole list and you can choose from. It keeps you, it makes you start thinking about what is the best way to start putting together what are your values and how you share it with people. Not necessarily because you have a life-limiting illness or you're old. In general, you know, it's not something we talk about. We know what our values, except from one or two things. So it's good to probably go through something like this and prepare yourselves for the conversations to come.
Okay, Laura. Kathy.
Sorry. Laura's
being channeled through Kathy.
She's definitely here.
We're listening.
She would say, you're absolutely, I mean, what you've said is echoed in these hundreds and thousands of responses we've been getting. Why don't we talk about this more? How can we talk about this more? So people have written me 2-3-page letters and, you know, multitudes of messages saying the same thing. I think what is starting to happen is that there are more opportunities. This Laura's Kitchen Table that we've opened up is one way. If you go via the website of Laura's Choice, there's a really amazing conversation happening there. Groundswell, I think, is a terrific organisation. The Dying to Know Day in August is also having an event here in Perth that I've been invited to be part of, so I know that there'll be another event, another opportunity for conversation. There's death cafes that meet from time to time. There's one actually next Friday at the Bodhi Tree Cafe, if you want to go along to that. So I think there's starting to pop up more opportunities. I'm an educator. I run the WA Screen Academy, and my students have revealed to me that one of their biggest fears is death, and they don't talk about it. Didn't get talked about at school. Didn't get talked about in their undergrad. And I think that it's important for educators to find ways to have those conversations. I know that Laura's Choice is now being used in universities and even in schools. We had a message from a young boy who said, I saw the film at school and I went home and I said to my mum, you have to watch this. Made his mother bring up iView and watch it. And then they talked about it and then they wrote us a letter. So that's a really encouraging thing, that there are avenues opening up for the conversation.
Great, thank you very much. So what I'm hearing is that the conversation has only just started, and it's up to all of us to carry on that conversation. And it's not one conversation, it's conversations. It's all the time, because people's attitudes and values and belief systems are an ever-changing process. I've got loads of thank yous to say, but I'd like to obviously thank my panel. I think you've been amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your stories. I'd like to thank the audience. I'm so delighted to have so many people and see so many people who want to be part of that conversation. So pat yourselves on the back. Thank you very much. From the Centre for Stories, I'd like to thank the State Library of WA for giving us a platform. This is a conversation that needs lots of platforms, so thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you. Please don't run away. Just a couple more minutes of your time just to do a bit of a shameless plug of upcoming Disrupted Festival of Ideas events. Firstly, I'd just like to, I forgot to actually apologise. We had no Auslan interpreter tonight. We actually have a policy where we try to have one for every single event, but we were just unable to get one tonight due to unforeseen circumstances. I'd like to thank Claudia Mancini and Caroline Wood at the Centre for Stories for pitching this idea to us at such a timely and important topic, and I think it's been a great discussion tonight about humanity and kindness. And I'd like to thank the panel, Belinda, Samar, Rita, Kathy and Scott, for engaging in that discussion. Thank you. We're really interested in your say. We're really interested in the conversation continue, but we'd also like to know what speakers and what themes and what discussions you would like to have as part of Disrupted. So if you go to our website, I'm hoping the slide will change. If you go to our website and look under Have Your Say, we've actually got a survey online at the moment where you can actually suggest speaking ideas for us. So shameless plug coming up. The session on the 29th of June, System Failure, Health and Legal Systems for Trans and Gender Diverse People, actually looks at the issues that transgender people have to navigate in terms of our systems and our government services. There's also another session coming up on the 1st of June that was delayed because of the COVID lockdown, and that's with Lucy Peach, and it's called Going with the Flow, and it's both an irreverent, there's changed the slide, an irreverent and meaningful discussion about periods, both for people that have them and people that don't have them. So I really encourage you to come along to that. So once again, thanks to the panel and thank you for the Centre for Stories, and have a safe evening, and thank you all for coming. Cheers.
Thank you.